Welcome to the deep dive. It's kind of wild to think back just a few years, really. We were all arguing about whether or not working from home even worked. And now look, it feels like everything's shifted. I mean, thanks to tech, obviously, things
Yeah.
are changing so fast. But also, we've had, some major global curveballs, and the result is global virtual work. It's not just a trend, it's here to stay, right? I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Something like 16% of all work is fully remote. And a whopping 82% of remote workers say this is the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a complete shift, no doubt. It's changing the way we think about work, and not just for individuals, it's organizations, the entire global economy, really.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dig into today on the deep dive. So, one of our amazing listeners sent us this incredible collection of research. I mean, it's a lot, and we're going to break it all down for you. So, think of this episode as like a cheat sheet, all the key insights on global virtual work.
Yeah, what's really cool about this stuff is that it gives us a bunch of different angles. So we'll be looking at the big picture of the research, try to make sense of how it all fits together, and then we'll even get into some cool ideas about where things might be headed. We're talking global virtual teams, of course, but also how work is getting spread out in general. And, tech. Can't forget the tech, all the digital tools that make this whole thing possible.
Our mission today, crystal clear. To give you a solid understanding of where global virtual work is right now and where it's going, no jargon, just straight talk. And by the end, you'll be up to speed. So, how do we even begin to unpack this? It's a big topic.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, though, because even though global virtual work is getting more important all the time, the research itself isn't really one big unified thing. What we see instead are three main areas of focus. And the first one, the area that's gotten most attention, is global virtual teams.
Global virtual teams. Okay, so that makes me think of people working together from all over the place, right? Like different countries, all connected through technology, all working towards the same goal.
Exactly. And there's a ton of research on this already, like 251 papers,
Mhm.
according to what you send over. It's all about how people who are spread out geographically can work together, using tech, of course, to achieve something as a team. Think about a multinational company with offices everywhere. They've got teams working on projects across different countries, totally virtually,
Mm.
or even just managing suppliers in other countries.
Makes sense. What about schools?
Oh, totally. Universities are using virtual teams all the time for students to collaborate on projects, get experience working across cultures, and then there's global research and development, especially in tech, software, for example. A lot of that happens virtually with teams all over the world.
Okay, so we've got these global virtual teams, but why? What are they trying to achieve? What's the point?
Well, there are a bunch of goals, actually. A big one is knowledge exchange. Making sure that expertise and knowledge can flow freely between different locations. That could mean getting knowledge from lots of different sources, or sharing it between departments or even with partners. It's also about bringing together the best people from all over the world. Like if you've got a super complicated engineering project, you might need experts from several different countries to get it done right. And of course, there's the cost factor. Virtual teams can cut down on travel expenses big time. And sometimes it even means lower labor costs if you're working with people in places where wages are lower. But it's not all about saving money. Like in research and development, it's often about boosting innovation. Bringing together a bunch of different perspectives can lead to some really creative solutions.
Interesting. It's not just about working from home, it's about using being global as an advantage.
Exactly. And for education, like I said before, the goal is all about giving students that global collaboration experience, which is super valuable. What's important here is that global virtual work isn't about trying to do the exact same things we used to do in person, just online. It's about figuring out how to use being global as a strategy.
Yeah.
How can being spread out geographically actually help us? Whether it's finding different kinds of knowledge or being more efficient with costs. And to do that, organizations really have to think differently about how they're structured and how they work.
Right. So if researchers are looking at all this, what kind of theories are they using? How do they make sense of how these teams work?
So there are a few key theories that pop up a lot. One of them is social identity theory. It's this idea that people identify strongly with their groups, and that can affect how well people from different countries or cultures can work together. And this is important, right? Because distance can make that us versus them feeling even stronger. So virtual teams need ways to build that sense of shared identity, even though everyone's spread out. Then there's similarity attraction theory, which is all about how people tend to connect more easily with the people they think are similar to them. So the theory helps researchers understand how trust and conflict play out in virtual teams. And then there's attribution theory, which is about how people explain things. Like when you're working with someone remotely, it's easy to make assumptions about them based on very little information. So researchers use this to understand those dynamics. And finally, there's something called transactive memory systems theory. This one's super important because it helps us understand how knowledge is shared and managed within virtual teams. Basically, it's figuring out who knows what and how they access that knowledge.
So it's like a mix of social psychology and like how organizations work. Right.
Mhm.
That's cool. And how do they actually study this stuff? What kind of research methods are we talking about?
So most of the research uses surveys. They'll ask team members questions about how they communicate, how the team works together, and what the results are. But there are also a lot of qualitative studies. These are more in-depth, like ethnography, where researchers actually spend time with virtual teams, even if it's virtual time, to really understand what it's like to be part of one. And there's grounded theory, which is about using data to develop new theories instead of just testing old ones.
Interesting.
Yeah. Mixed methods approaches, which use both qualitative and quantitative data, they're around too, but not as common. One thing that surprised me, though, is that there aren't that many meta-analyses. Those studies that combine the results from lots of different studies.
Huh.
Yeah. And that's kind of weird, right? Because there's so much research on this topic. Maybe it means that the findings aren't very consistent, or maybe it's just hard to combine all these different kinds of studies.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, so that's global virtual teams. What's next?
So the second area is distributed work. This one's broader. It's not just about teams. It's about work that happens in different countries, period.
Yeah.
Like the organizations, the processes, the challenges. It's a different way of thinking about things. We found about 68 papers on this.
Okay, so who are we talking about here? What kind of work environments are we looking at?
Well, for one, there's a lot of research on gig work that happens on those big online platforms. Freelancers all over the world, connecting with the clients all over the world. There's also research on offshoring, where companies move certain jobs to other countries. And then, of course, there are people who work virtually for multinational companies, but they might not be part of a formal team. And then there's this really fascinating area, digital nomads, people who travel and work remotely, and even those social media influencers who work with brands all over the place.
I see. So the goals here are going to be different from what those virtual teams were focused on, right?
Yeah, for sure. Here, it's more about what the organization or the individual is trying to achieve, not just the team. Like, a lot of companies are all about saving money, so they outsource work or hire digital nomads who might be willing to work for less. Others are looking for specific skills and knowledge that they can't find locally. And for individuals, especially those digital nomads, it's often about lifestyle. They want freedom, flexibility, the chance to see the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any specific theories that researchers use to understand this, like broader distributed work landscape?
Yeah, there are a few, like signaling theory. This one's all about how people and organizations show that they're competent and trustworthy, even when they're not physically present. And then there's transaction cost theory, which helps explain why companies choose certain global work arrangements over others, like why hire remote employees instead of outsourcing. Social information processing theory is important too because it's about how people figure out their roles and responsibilities in virtual environments. But honestly, a lot of the research in this area is still kind of exploratory. They're not always using super well-established theories, at least not yet.
Okay, and how about the research methods? Anything different from what we saw with the global virtual teams?
There's definitely more variety here. A lot of researchers are doing literature reviews, basically trying to summarize what's already known about this big, messy world of distributed work. They're also doing lots of interviews with global virtual workers and analyzing stuff on social media to get a sense of their experiences and perspectives. You also see some quantitative stuff like surveys and even those gravity models that economists use to look at how people and things move between different locations. Mixed methods are around, but not as much as with the team's research. One thing I noticed, though, is that research on offshoring seems to really rely on those qualitative methods.
All right, so that covers distributed work. What's the third piece of the puzzle?
The third one is all about the tech. It's specifically looking at how digital technologies make global virtual work possible and how they shape the whole thing. It's not just about tech as a tool, but as something that actually changes how global virtual work happens. This one's a bit newer than the research on virtual teams, but there's still a good number of papers out there, 93 to be exact.
Okay, so when researchers look at this, who are they focusing on? What kind of environments?
It depends. Sometimes it's just general collaborators and how technology affects the way they work together. There's also research specifically on offshoring, but looking at it through the lens of the technologies they use. Sometimes they even look at global virtual citizens, which is a broader term for people who are connected and interacting online all across the globe. What's interesting is that even though we know a lot about IT outsourcing in general, we don't really know that much about how specific types of virtual workers, like digital nomads, use technology in their day-to-day work.
That's a great point. So, what are the main things researchers are trying to figure out when it comes to technology and global virtual work?
It's really about how to use digital tools to overcome the challenges of working virtually. So they're looking at things like communication and collaboration, figuring out best practices for remote work, how to manage projects virtually, how to resolve conflicts online, and ultimately how to make organizations more agile in a global context.
It's funny, but one thing I didn't see a lot of research on is whether cost plays a big role in what technologies people choose to use. I mean, that seems like a pretty important factor, right?
Yeah, for sure. So are there any big theories that researchers are using in this technology-focused area? Yeah, a lot of it is about the technologies themselves, like media richness theory and media synchronicity theory. Those help explain why different communication technologies are good for different tasks and interactions. Then there's technology affordances theory, which looks at how people see and use the features of different technologies. You see some stuff on knowledge transfer theory too, how knowledge is shared using technology. And even world systems theory, which is like a big picture view of how global technology systems shape international relations. But like with distributed work, some of this research is more exploratory and doesn't always use those really established theories.
So, what are the most common ways researchers are studying the role of technology?
Because it's such a new area, a lot of the research is qualitative or conceptual. That means doing interviews, case studies of companies using new technologies, and analyzing virtual work platforms. There are some quantitative studies using surveys, but not as many. And mixed methods approaches are still pretty rare. One thing that's missing is longitudinal studies, studies that follow virtual teams over time to see how they use technology and how that changes.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Global virtual teams, distributed work, and the role of digital technologies. It's a lot.
Yeah, you're right. It's a lot. But each of these areas brings something unique to the table. But the real magic happens when we start thinking about how they all connect. Like, what are the big unanswered questions? Where are the gaps in our knowledge? And that leads us to what the researchers are calling overarching themes for the future. These are the things that bridge all three areas and point to what needs to be studied next.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting, right? What are these overarching themes?
So based on the research you provided, there are four big themes that need more attention. The first one is people. And even though there's a lot of research already, there are still lots of unanswered questions about what specific skills and abilities, what they call KSAs, people need to succeed in these virtual environments. It's not just about knowing how to use a computer. It's about things like language skills, especially when you're working with people from different cultures. The research calls it digital technical intelligence, which is basically about having a deep understanding of digital tools and platforms. And then there are those personal qualities like resilience, being able to deal with the challenges of working remotely. And there are still lots of questions about how global virtual work impacts people's well-being, their stress levels, their health. And as we talked about earlier, there are all these new types of global workers, digital nomads, people in the gig economy, social media influencers. We need to learn more about them too.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, even though it's virtual, it's still people doing the work, and it's a different way of working. So, what's the second theme?
The second big theme is technology. And this goes beyond the technologies that people are using right now. The research is really pointing to the need to understand how emerging technologies are going to change everything. Stuff like AI, blockchain, even 5G. Like, how will AI change the game for global virtual work?
Right.
Think about it. AI could be used to automate tasks,
Hmm.
make things more efficient. We could have real-time translation during meetings with people from different countries. It could even boost productivity. But AI also comes with risks, right? Algorithmic bias, privacy issues, all that stuff. And then there's the metaverse, which is still kind of a new concept, but it has the potential to change how we collaborate globally. Virtual and augmented reality could become a much bigger part of global work, and that's something we need to understand better.
Wow, the metaverse at work. That's kind of mind-blowing. Okay, what about the third theme?
The third one is context. So we talked about team context and organizational context, but there's also the bigger picture, the macro environment. This is all the stuff that affects global virtual work at every level, but it's not really studied as much as it should be. We're talking about the digital infrastructure in different countries, which can vary a lot.
Hmm.
There's also the whole legal and regulatory landscape for global work, which is super complicated. And then you have cultural norms and values, the global economy, migration patterns, even things like global crises. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
We really need to understand how all of this impacts global virtual work. Like there's this idea of institutional logics, which are the basic norms and beliefs that shape how organizations work in different societies. These are crucial in global virtual work because what's normal in one country might be totally different in another. And that can affect everything from communication styles to how decisions are made. It's also important to think about how global job design and organizational structures are changing, the rise of skills-based work, virtual organizations that don't have a physical office. And one concrete example is data privacy. If you're working with sensitive information, the rules might be completely different depending on where everyone's located.
It's amazing how much is going on outside of just the actual work that people are doing, right? Okay. What about the fourth theme?
The fourth and final theme is time. And this one's a little more abstract, but it's really important. The research suggests that we need to start thinking about time as a factor in global virtual work. Like there are cycles in global work, projects that progress over time, and then there are those sudden disruptions that can happen. So researchers are starting to ask questions like, what happens when people work virtually for long periods of time? How you plan and coordinate work when people are in different time zones and the future is unpredictable? And what happens when something big happens, like a pandemic or an economic downturn? How does that change things for virtual teams?
Time. It's funny how we forget that it's always there, ticking away in the background. But you're right, it's something we need to pay more attention to. So we've got these four themes: people, technology, context, and time. It's a lot to take in, but it really shows how complex and interconnected this whole field is.
Absolutely. And if we focus on these big themes that connect the different areas of research,
Hmm.
we can start to build a much better understanding of what global virtual work really is and where it's headed.
Okay, so we've explored the research on global virtual work. We talked about those three core domains: virtual teams, distributed work, and technology. And then we dug into these four overarching themes for the future. Now, how do we sum it all up? What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
The main takeaway is that global virtual work isn't just one thing. It's complex, it's constantly evolving. The research out there covers so many different angles, from how teams work to how technology is changing everything. And as we look ahead, it's clear that the human factor, technology, the broader context, and even time all play a huge role. It's about seeing the big picture.
You know, as we were talking, I was really struck by how new some of this research is, like the stuff on well-being, for example, or the impact of AI. It really feels like we're just scratching the surface?
Totally agree. It's a fast-moving field, and in some ways, what's happening in the real world is moving faster than the research. And that makes me think about something. I mean, what happens as AI gets even smarter? What if it can do more of the things that humans do now? How will that change our definition of global virtual work? Will it still be about people collaborating, or will it be more about people and AI working together all across the globe?
That's a really interesting question. So, for our listeners who want to dive even deeper into all of this, where would you suggest they start? I mean, this episode has been a great overview, but there's so much more to explore.
For sure. Think of this as like a launching pad. We've given you the basics, the framework. Now it's about digging into the specific areas that grab your attention, whether it's cross-cultural communication, the ethics of the gig economy, the potential of the metaverse. There's a ton of research out there waiting to be discovered.
So, it's clear, right? Global virtual work isn't just a fad. It's a fundamental shift in how we work. And as technology keeps changing and our world becomes more interconnected, understanding all of this is only going to become more important. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this has been a helpful way to get up to speed on this complex, fascinating, and always changing world of global virtual work.